It was supposed to be just another quiet return. After weeks away, closing an international deal, billionaire tech magnate Sebastian Locke landed in Geneva, days ahead of schedule, unannounced, unguarded, and unprepared for what he'd find in the home he thought he controlled. The sprawling estate sat wrapped in silence, save for the soft creak of floorboards and the occasional chirp beyond the glass walls. But as he stepped into the sunlit hallway, a sound broke the stillness, soft, rhythmic, tender. He followed it like a ghost in his own house, past the marble staircase, past the untouched grand piano, toward the nursery. And then he stopped. There, in the vintage rocking chair by the window, sat Grace. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not like this. The maid, quiet, efficient, forgettable, cradled his infant son to her chest. She didn't see him. Her eyes were closed, and she was nursing him, the silk of her dark skin against the pale baby's cheek, the hum of a lullaby, the soft sighs of his son, content, comforted, safe. Something primal surged in Sebastian. Disbelief, anger, and beneath it all, something he didn't want to name, something like grief. Because that lullaby, his wife used to sing it. But she'd been gone for 9 months, and now a stranger held their son in her arms like she was born to. This wasn't just about boundaries or roles. It was about something deeper, something older than money, something that would force Sebastian to face the cracks in his perfect world. And what he'd do next would unravel everything. Sebastian didn't move. From the hallway, he watched her, Grace, completely unaware she was being seen. The light from the window spilled over her like a soft veil, casting a golden hue on her skin. She wore the same simple gray uniform, the one she always did. But in that moment, there was nothing ordinary about her. She was still humming. The tune was familiar, too familiar. It was a lullaby his late wife Elise used to sing when cradling their son in that same rocking chair. The song had died with her, or so Sebastian thought. But here it was, again floating through the air, in a voice so warm, it made something ache in his chest. He stepped forward, quiet but deliberate, and that was when Grace saw him. Her entire body stiffened. Her eyes widened in shock, and she instinctively pulled the baby closer, as if protecting him. Then her face turned pale, lips parting in silent apology. "Sir, I didn't know you were home." He didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, he looked down at his son. Blissfully asleep, mouth still slack against Grace's chest, tiny hands curled in peace. "You're breastfeeding him?" Sebastian said flatly, voice almost emotionless. Grace hesitated, then nodded. Yes. His eyes locked onto hers. Why, her throat moved as she swallowed. She adjusted the blanket around the child's body gently, like she had done it 100 times. "He wouldn't take the bottle, sir." For 3 nights. He cried for hours and wouldn't sleep. The formula made him sick. Rosalind, the nanny, had left, and She stopped, gathering breath. "I didn't know what else to do. I had milk from my own child. I thought I could help. Just until you returned." Sebastian's jaw clenched. "And who gave you permission?" "No one," Grace replied, standing now, though still holding the baby. "Close. I didn't ask. There was no one to ask. You crossed a line." "I know," she whispered, eyes glistening, but he stopped crying. The silence between them thickened. He could have fired her right then. Should have. The Sebastian Locke everyone else knew. Decisive, sharp, cold, would have called security, drawn up a non-disclosure, and erased her presence by lunchtime. But he didn't. He looked at her, really looked at her. There was no fear in her eyes now, only a quiet defiance. And behind that, something he hadn't seen in months. Compassion. Grace turned away slightly, preparing to hand over the baby. "I'll leave," she said softly. "Just let me settle him in his crib first." But Sebastian raised his hand. "Wait." His voice surprised even himself. She turned back confused, and he asked more quietly this time, "What's his name?" Grace blinked. "I thought you named him William, sir." "I did. But I meant, what do you call him? When you hold him." She looked down at the child in her arms. "Little Star," she said. Sebastian didn't know why, but that answer shook something in him. Not because it was cute, but because it sounded Right, like something Elise might have said. And it terrified him, because he wasn't ready to admit what that meant. Not yet. The silence in the room stretched longer than it should have. Grace stood still, rocking the baby, gently waiting for Sebastian to say something more, anything at all. But he didn't. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the small child, curled against her chest like it was the first time he'd really seen his own son. Then he turned and walked away. No words, no order, no outburst. Just the quiet sound of expensive leather shoes against polished wood floors disappearing down the hallway. Grace let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. By the time she tucked William, her little star, into his crib and stepped out into the hall, the house felt different. Not louder, not colder, just changed, like something had been stirred beneath the marble and crown molding that had kept the estate airtight for so long. She returned to the staff quarters in silence. Sebastian, meanwhile, didn't go far. He locked himself in the study, poured a drink he didn't want, and sat in the leather chair behind the massive desk that had once belonged to his father. For 30 minutes, he stared at nothing. Then he opened the security app on his phone. Camera 12. Nursery. William was sleeping. Grace had dimmed the lights and placed a small toy giraffe near the crib, just as she always did. She thought no one noticed that detail, but he had. Every night, the same giraffe tucked beside the child's shoulder like a silent guardian. Sebastian zoomed in slightly, watched his son's chest rise and fall. Then, against his better judgment, he replayed the footage from earlier that afternoon. The moment Grace entered the room, her arms already cradling William. The way she checked the temperature with the back of her hand. The way she shifted her body to support his neck. The way she hummed that lullaby like it was something sacred. And the moment she breastfed him, natural fluid unafraid. She had done it not with awkwardness or hesitation, but like a mother, like someone who knew what love meant. He turned off the app. That night, Sebastian didn't sleep, not because of anger, but because for the first time since Elise's funeral, he wasn't sure if he still understood what it meant to be a father or a man. At dawn, Grace found a note slipped under her door. It wasn't signed. Just a single sentence written in neat, masculine handwriting. Meet me in the East Greenhouse at 9 a.m. Grace stared at it for a long time before folding it neatly and slipping it into her apron pocket. She had been summoned before. By chefs, by head butlers, once even by Elise herself before she passed. But never by Sebastian. The man was more myth than manager, always away, always distant, the sort of employer you served. From a distance with lowered eyes and quick footsteps. Yet, at 8:55, she was there waiting in the greenhouse, surrounded by dew-kissed orchids and the faint scent of rosemary. At exactly 900, Sebastian entered. Not yet. No blazer. He looked like he hadn't slept. But his posture was still perfect, his voice still measured. You could have asked for help, he said without preamble. Grace looked at him squarely. There was no one to ask. Sebastian nodded once, as if he already knew that answer, as if it was the only one she could have given. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope of, I contacted my lawyers this morning, he said. They're drawing up a non-disclosure agreement. It protects you and him. This stays private, forever. Grace swallowed. Does that mean I'm being let go? He looked at her then, really looked at her. No, he said softly. That means I'm asking you to stay. Grace didn't respond right away. Her eyes dropped to the envelope in his hand, then back up to his face, searching for any trace of a trick, some cold business calculation masked in a moment of softness. But there was none. Sebastian Blackwood was watching her. Not like a boss, not like a billionaire used to making demands, but like a man who had seen something that unsettled him, and maybe humbled him. I want to be clear, he added after a moment. This isn't charity. It's not pity. You've kept my son alive, safe and calm in a house that hasn't felt like a home since his mother passed. You earned your place here. You've more than earned my trust. Grace took a careful breath. And what about William? What about him? He's bonded to me now. That doesn't just go away. If you change your mind, if you send me away later, I won't. There was no hesitation in his voice. Still, Grace didn't let her guard down. Life had taught her better than that. Black women didn't get second chances because someone felt something. They got tested, pushed, erased. Sebastian sensed it too. "I'm not asking you to forget who you are, Grace." He said, his voice lower now, "And I'm not going to pretend like I've been the most attentive father. I've made mistakes. I've buried myself in business deals and flight schedules and board meetings so I wouldn't have to face what I lost. But I can't hide anymore." His hands tightened into fists at his sides before he forced them to relax. "I watched that footage," he admitted quietly. "The way you held him, the lullaby, the care. I sat in my study and realized I've been in the same house with my son for 9 months, and I didn't even know his middle name." Grace blinked. "It's Elias," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "That's what Elise wanted, wasn't it?" She nodded. Elias was her grandfather. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence between them that didn't feel heavy. It just was. Sebastian stepped forward and placed the envelope on the bench between them. "It's not just an NDA," he said. "There's also a provision for you, a salary increase, health benefits, and legal protection to ensure you're never penalized for what you did. I know how people talk, especially about women who look like you." Grace stiffened slightly, but he continued. "You did what no one else would have. You stepped in. You kept him fed, loved, calm. You stepped into a role without waiting for permission, and I'm not punishing you for that. I'm thanking you." Grace's jaw tightened. She had grown used to silence, used to being invisible, to moving through luxury homes like a ghost, seen only when something was out of place or someone wanted to brag about how diverse their staff was. But now a man like Sebastian Blackwood stood before her eyes, sincere words, unpolished, offering something rare. Respect. She nodded once. Slowly. "I'll stay," she said, "for William. But I won't pretend to be something I'm not." Sebastian smiled, tired but real. "I wouldn't want you to." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "That lullaby you sang. Where did you learn it?" Grace glanced over her shoulder at the orchids swaying slightly in the breeze. "My grandmother," she said. "She was a midwife in Georgia. Said it could calm any crying baby, even ones with no name yet." Sebastian's expression shifted, just a flicker, but it was there. Then he nodded and left, leaving Grace alone in the greenhouse sunlight, catching on the leaves. Her hand resting over her heart where the quiet ache of dignity and disbelief slowly began to fade. That night, Grace sat beside William's crib, her fingertips lightly brushing the curls on his forehead as he slept. The nursery was quiet now, save for the hum of the monitor and the occasional rustle of trees beyond the window. But inside her chest there was a storm, memories, questions, and a gnawing unease she couldn't shake. She had agreed to stay. That much was clear. But what now? Would Sebastian keep his word? Would the world that had always looked through her finally start seeing her? The next morning her answer came, just not from Sebastian. It came from Mrs. Delaney. The house manager stood at the kitchen doorway, like she owned the marble beneath her shoes. Thin lips pursed clipboard in hand, a small headset hooked over one ear, like she was coordinating a NASA launch rather than overseeing domestic staff. "Miss Grace," she said sharply, "Mr. Blackwood has informed me of the change in your status." Grace remained focused on preparing William's breakfast. She kept her voice calm. "Yes, I want to make one thing very clear." Delaney continued, stepping forward. "Just because Mr. Blackwood has taken a temporary liking to you doesn't mean the rest of us will bend the rules. You're still staff, and staff do not sit at the dining table. They do not use the front entrance. They certainly do not speak to guests unless spoken to." Grace set down the spoon. "I wasn't planning on doing any of those things," she replied quietly. "But if William needs me, I'll be where he is." Delaney's eyes narrowed. "You're clever," she said. "Too clever for your own good." Grace didn't respond. She didn't need to. She'd met women like Mrs. Delaney before, women who used rules to keep others in their place, especially women who didn't look like them. They came with perfect posture, perfect diction, and perfectly sharpened daggers hidden behind house policy. That afternoon, Sebastian didn't mention Delaney. Instead, he invited Grace to sit in on William's pediatric appointment at the estate. Dr. Reinhardt, the family's longtime physician, raised a brow when Grace entered the room and pulled up. A chair beside Sebastian. She's here at my request, Sebastian said plainly. She knows more about my son's sleep patterns, feeding schedule, and recent milestones than I do. Grace didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She opened the notebook she'd been keeping since William was 2 months old and read off. Exact numbers, ounces, nap times, body temperature fluctuations, things the doctor hadn't expected from the help. Darnstärker. Reinhardt nodded slowly. Impressive, he muttered. Very impressive. That night, Sebastian found Grace once more in the greenhouse. This time he wasn't holding an envelope. This time he held 2 cups of coffee and a question. Do you think I failed him? He asked, taking a seat on the edge of a planter box, his voice low. Grace looked up from the pot of orchids she was misting. I think you did what a lot of fathers do, she said carefully. You survived your grief by pretending it didn't exist. But that boy didn't need a CEO. He needed a father. Sebastian exhaled sharply. I don't know how to be one. You just show up, Grace said. Even when it's messy, especially then. Silence hung between them for a moment, warm but uncertain. And then quietly, he said it. Will you teach me? Grace blinked. Not at the request, but at the honesty in his voice. This was a man who'd been raised to give orders, not ask questions. Yet here he was asking, not just for her time, but for her trust. And maybe, just maybe, for something more. The following days passed in a strange, quiet rhythm. Sebastian began joining Grace and William in the mornings first, just as an observer standing in the doorway with his coffee, then slowly taking part. He held his son more, fed him, even tried to rock him to sleep, awkward at first, but improving with every attempt. Grace didn't say much. She didn't need to. But every time she handed William over or corrected the way Sebastian held the bottle, something passed between them. Not flirtation. Not yet. It was softer than that. Respect, recognition, a kind of unspoken agreement we're both learning. And neither of us is above it. But not everyone in the Blackwood estate was pleased. Mrs. Delaney's disapproval became louder. She began shifting staff schedules, claiming protocol breaches. Grace was suddenly assigned menial tasks that weren't hers. Her laundry went missing. Her room wasn't cleaned. The house, once neutral, began to push back against her presence. But she said nothing, not until one evening when William refused to eat. He fussed, cried, then went completely still, too still. Grace's instincts screamed. She called Sebastian. Within minutes, he was at the nursery, his phone still in hand mid-conference call. I think he's going into a febrile episode, she said urgently, already grabbing a thermometer. Sebastian ended the call without apology. What do we do? Grace rattled off instructions, cool cloths, undressing him, checking vitals, and Sebastian obeyed without hesitation. No questions, no ego. By the time the doctor arrived, the fever had broken. William was breathing steadily again, cradled against Grace's chest. The doctor turned to Sebastian. Had she not acted as quickly as she did, we might be having a very different conversation. Sebastian looked at Grace, something fierce and unshakable forming behind his eyes. Later that night, he requested a meeting with the staff. Delaney arrived first, smug. The others followed, nervous. Effective immediately, Sebastian began voice level but firm. Miss, Grace will no longer be referred to as the maid. She is William's primary caregiver. Anyone who undermines her, disregards her instructions, or questions her presence will answer directly to me. The room fell silent. Delaney scoffed. With all due respect, sir, the staff. You've disrespected her since the day she arrived, Sebastian. Cut in. That ends tonight. No one spoke. Grace stood at the back, still holding William. Sebastian turned toward her. Would you please speak? Grace hesitated, then stepped forward. I didn't come here expecting anything more than work. I certainly didn't expect to stay. But your son, she looked down at the baby in her arms. He matters to me. And I won't apologize for caring. It was the quiet way she said it. No performance. No begging. Just truth. The kind that made even the hardest hearts in that room take pause. Sebastian nodded, and for the first time, Grace felt something shift, not just in the house, but in the man who owned it. Not control, not pity, but accountability, and something even rarer than that. Allegiance. The days that followed moved quietly, but deliberately, as if the house itself had exhaled. Grace's position in the estate was no longer questioned. Delaney, though visibly rattled, kept her distance. Other staff softened no longer, whispering in corners or exchanging glances when Grace entered a room. Instead, they began asking her questions about William, about sleep routines, even about how she'd calmed him. So quickly during the fever, she never bragged, just answered plainly. Grace had never needed attention. She only wanted to do her job right. But her presence was no longer silent. It carried weight. Sebastian noticed it most. He began inviting her into conversations not just about the baby, but about the house, about changes he was considering, about the kind of father he wanted to be. Sometimes they talked late into the evening after William was asleep. Those moments blurred the line between professional and personal, but not recklessly. They shared memories, stories, losses. She told him about growing up with her grandmother in a small flat above a bakery in Marseille. He told her about boarding schools and lonely holidays in this very house. One night, Grace found a photograph in the nursery drawer. A woman holding a newborn, her face full of joy and worry. Clara, Sebastian said, recognizing the photo immediately. William's mother. Grace looked at the image quietly. He has her eyes. Sebastian nodded, and for the first time, his voice cracked. She was complicated, brilliant, but scared. She never believed she was enough. Grace didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she sat next to him and said softly, "But she gave him you, and you gave him me. Somehow, that has to mean something." In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. No declarations, no gestures. Just the knowledge that pain doesn't make people smaller if shared the right way. It makes them stronger. That night, Grace found fresh linens on her bed, flowers on her nightstand. From Sebastian. No note, just a quiet acknowledgement that she belonged. But peace has its enemies. And while the house calmed, the world beyond its gates had begun to stir. Photographs had surfaced, unflattering, invasive. Grace with William in her arms. Sebastian standing beside her. Headlines dripping with implication. Anonymous whispers in tabloids, asking the same old questions. Why was the billionaire allowing the maid so close? What was really going on inside that mansion? Sebastian's legal team brought him a file the next morning. Grace's past, her full name, her family history, her old address in Marseille, even a sealed court record from when she was 16, wrongfully accused of shoplifting when her grandmother was dying and they had no food in the house. She never told anyone. Sebastian stared at the file, then slid it across the table untouched. "Burn it," he said. "But sir, we should at least—" I said burn it. He left the meeting without another word. That evening, he knocked on Grace's door. She opened it holding William. Her face said everything she'd seen the news. She knew. "I don't care what they say," he told her. "I only care about what's real." Grace looked down at the baby, then back at him. "I've always been real, even when the world refused to see me." Sebastian reached out, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Then let's make sure they do." The storm didn't wait for them to prepare. By the next morning, the tabloids weren't just speculating, they were naming, publishing, dragging Grace's photo across front pages with headlines like "From Maid to Mistress" and "The Black Nanny" and "The Billionaire Baby." It wasn't just cruel, it was violent. Grace tried to keep her head down, tried to pretend William's giggles could drown out the noise of an entire country dissecting her life, her motives, her skin. But it was impossible to ignore. Paparazzi camped outside the estate. A drone flew too close to the nursery window. William cried when the lights flashed through his curtains in the middle of the night. Grace didn't cry, but her silence was heavier now. Each step through the house echoed like an accusation. It wasn't just about shame, it was about danger. She packed a small bag and knocked on Sebastian's study door. Her hands trembled, even though she tried to steady them. "I need to go," she said. He looked up from his desk slowly, like he'd already known this moment was coming. "Grace, I won't let him become a scandal." Her voice didn't break. "You're his father. He deserves a peaceful life. And right now, I'm a threat to that." Sebastian stood, across the room. "You are not the threat." She forced a small smile. "The world disagrees. I don't care what the world thinks. But William will one day," she whispered, "and he'll read what they wrote. He'll see how they twisted my presence. My color, my care. He might even blame himself. Sebastian stared at her for a long time, then lowered his gaze. She placed her hand over his heart gently. This doesn't erase what we've shared. He covered her hand with his. But it's not enough to protect you, he said. Grace gave a small nod. I know. She left before dawn, before William woke, before her heart had a chance to betray her. The house felt colder without her, the nursery quieter, and Sebastian, he didn't go after her. Not yet. Instead, he called a press conference. Not his lawyers, not his publicist. Him. The cameras clicked like gunfire when he stepped onto the podium, hair tousled tie, abandoned suit, wrinkled as if he'd slept in it, which he had. My name is Sebastian Aldridge, he said, and I need to talk about the woman the world keeps calling my maid. He let the word settle. Her name is Grace Delacroix. She saved my son's life not once, but every single day she held him in her arms. She taught me how to be a father. She taught me how to be human again. The crowd hushed. I don't care about your gossip. I don't care about your assumptions. What I care about is the truth. And the truth is, this Grace was never beneath this family. She held it up. He paused. Let the silence ring like a bell. And if this city cannot stomach the idea of a black woman being the heart of a white legacy, then it is not Grace who needs to leave. It is the city that must learn to change. The statement went viral in less than an hour. But Sebastian didn't care about the numbers. He only cared about the train schedule to Marseille, because Grace was gone. But she hadn't gone far, and he was finally ready to follow. The Marseille train station was quiet that morning, wrapped in the hush of coastal fog and the distant sound of waves. Grace sat on a bench near the edge of the platform, holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee she hadn't touched. Her suitcase rested by her feet, worn and silent. She had no idea where she would go next. She only knew she couldn't go back, not after the headlines, the stares, the whispered cruelty that came so easily when people thought they were better than you. She kept checking her phone even though no one had called, until they did. Not a message, not a voicemail, but a shadow. It moved across the ground before she even saw him. She looked up slowly, heart stuttering like a faulty engine, and there he was. Sebastian, not in a suit, not with security. Just a man in a navy coat and scuffed shoes standing in front of her with tired eyes and a tremble in his voice. You didn't say goodbye. Grace stood shocked. How did you? Doesn't matter. He swallowed. I shouldn't have let you leave. I thought silence was protection, but it was just cowardice. She stared at him, unsure if this was real. I'm not here to convince you of anything, he added, voice low. I'm here to ask you to come home. She blinked hard. Sebastian. He stepped closer, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. I bought this estate. In Provence. Quiet. Private. Olive trees. No press. She said nothing. And if you say yes, William will have his mother. And I'll have someone who never asked for anything but gave everything anyway. She finally found her voice. I'm not sure the world is ready for a family like that. Then we'll build a world, that is. Grace looked away, the fog curling around them like a soft curtain. She wanted to believe him, but belief had always been a dangerous thing. I have scars, she whispered. Some you can't see. So do I, he said. But maybe we can teach each other how to live with them. A long silence passed. Then slowly Grace stepped forward, and instead of answering with words, she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers like they were made to fit. From behind them, a small voice called out. Mama. Grace turned. William stood just a few steps away, holding the hand of a kind-faced woman, Sebastian's sister, who had traveled with them. William's curls bounced as he ran toward her, arms outstretched. She dropped to her knees, catching him in a tearful embrace. You came, he said, cheeks flushed. You found me. Grace held him tight, her voice cracking. I never left, baby. I just needed to make sure we were safe. Sebastian watched, his heart full. For the first time in years, his family wasn't broken. It was beginning. The train never came. Grace didn't board. William didn't wave goodbye from the window. And Sebastian never watched her disappear again. Instead, they walked together through the old alleys of Marseille, past cafes opening for the day, past couples, with cameras and fishermen gutting their morning catch. No one paid attention to the billionaire holding hands with a maid, and for once, neither of them cared. By afternoon, they arrived at the stone house in Provence. It wasn't a palace. It didn't need to be. Ivy crawled up the old walls. The shutters were pale blue. A breeze swept through the olive grove behind it like a blessing. William ran ahead chasing butterflies. Grace stepped into the sunlight. Her suitcase bumped the threshold as she paused. "Are you sure?" she asked. Sebastian smiled. "No, but I've never been more willing to learn." Inside there was a fire already lit. A basket of fresh bread on the table. Someone had thought of everything. Grace stepped into the warmth, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to earn the air she breathed. The days passed quietly. They taught William to plant herbs in the garden. Grace began to paint again, her hands unsure at first, then freer with each brushstroke. Sebastian cooked badly at first, until William told him his scrambled eggs were less sad. There was no press, no meetings, no PR cleanup, just stillness, healing, something real. But the world didn't forget them. One morning a letter arrived. A single envelope with no return address, just a gold crest. Sebastian opened it slowly, then passed it to Grace. Inside was a note. "We owe you both an apology and an invitation." The board voted. Grace Laurent will be offered a seat in the Foundation's new Council for Social Ethics in Corporate Culture. If she chooses to accept, her voice will shape what we become next. At the bottom, 12 signatures. Some from men who had once looked through her like glass. Grace stared at it for a long time. "You don't have to say yes," Sebastian said gently. "No one gets to demand more of you." She folded the letter and tucked it into her sweater. "I'm not doing it for them," she said. "I'm doing it for the next girl they try to erase." That evening, they sat by the fireplace. Sebastian read aloud from a weathered book. William dozed between them, his head on Grace's lap. Outside, a storm rolled in, tapping softly against the windows. And inside there was peace. No speeches, no cameras. Just 3 people who had survived something ugly and built something beautiful in its place. Tomorrow the world would start spinning again. There would be more decisions to make. More letters, more whispers. But tonight they had each other. And for now that was enough. The seasons passed quietly, but nothing about their life was small. In the spring, Grace accepted the offer from the Foundation, not out of ambition, but to rebuild what once tried to break her. She spoke at closed-door sessions in Brussels, helped redesign codes of ethics, and rewrote standards that would influence hiring across the continent. Her words didn't shout. They whispered just enough to move powerful men to think differently. She never once brought up her past. She never had to. Her presence alone reminded them that dignity doesn't come with wealth. It walks in with integrity and doesn't wait for permission to sit down. Sebastian didn't return to the boardroom. Not really. He restructured his company to run without him. He sold off the parts that drained the soul out of people and reinvested in education, housing, food security. They said he was going soft. He said maybe it was time the world learned how to be softer. And William, he thrived. He learned to ride horses not for status, but for the thrill of the wind in his hair. He started school in the village, fluent in both French and English, but more importantly, fluent in empathy. He knew what it meant to be held, to be heard. One day, at a small ceremony in Paris, Grace received an award for her work in equity and human dignity. As flashbulbs popped and hands clapped, she looked out at the crowd, then down at William, who was holding Sebastian's hand and beaming. After the event, a journalist asked her, "How did you get here from being a housemaid to sitting among ministers?" Grace looked the woman square in the eyes and replied, "By never letting anyone else define the value of my heart." That night in their quiet home in Provence, Sebastian poured her a glass of wine. They sat beneath the stars, the scent of lavender in the breeze, the lights of the nearby town glowing in the distance. "What do you think he'll remember?" Grace asked, nodding toward William's window. Sebastian thought for a moment. "Not the mansion, not the scandal," he said. "He'll remember that his mother's strength rebuilt his father's soul. He'll remember that when everything cracked open, we didn't run, we rebuilt." Together, Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, and in that simple act beneath a sky that had seen too much history to be, impressed the greatest legacy of all. was sealed not in gold or wealth or applause, but in love, resilience, and the quiet triumph of truth finally being seen. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that dignity can rise from silence, that healing can come from the unlikeliest hands, and that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin in the quietest rooms, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We share more than stories here. We share reckonings, restorations, and reminders that behind every headline, every role, every title, there's a heart waiting to be heard. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never underestimate the strength of those the world tries to overlook.